The story begins far beyond Moscow's bright lights, in the frozen reaches of Russia where concrete walls rise like silent mountains and razor wire cuts through the gray horizon. These prisons are more than places of confinement. They are reminders of a long, punishing history that dates back to the Soviet-era gulags. Decades after the fall of the Soviet Union, the system remains a world of secrecy and intimidation, designed to break both body and spirit. From the frigid Arctic Circle to remote Siberian settlements, each facility stands isolated, surrounded by endless forests or tundra, making escape nearly impossible. Stepping inside, you are struck first by the oppressive silence, then by the sudden clamor of metal doors slamming shut. The air is damp and metallic, thick with the smell of rust and disinfectant. Former inmates describe an unshakable chill, a cold that seeps into the bones and never leaves, no matter the season. The prisons are designed to cut prisoners off from society and from each other. Narrow corridors snake through massive blocks of concrete, each turn monitored by cameras and armed guards who rarely speak but whose presence is constant. The Russian penal system traces its roots to an era when punishment was meant to be as grueling as the crimes themselves. Many of today's maximum security colonies are direct descendants of Stalin's infamous labor camps, where prisoners once worked to the point of collapse in mines and forests. Though the forced labor has shifted in form, the essence of harsh survival remains. Inmates may be sent thousands of kilometers from home, making family visits almost impossible and ensuring they remain forgotten by the outside world. These facilities are not only built to contain people but to break them. The architecture itself feels hostile, low ceilings that force a stoop, windowless cells that steal the concept of time, and heavy doors that echo with every slam like a reminder of helplessness. The isolation is psychological warfare, eroding hope day by day. For many, simply making it through the first week is an achievement. Enduring years feels like a near miracle. International human rights observers have long criticized these prisons as among the harshest on earth. Stories of abuse and neglect leak out through former inmates and rare investigative journalists, painting a picture of a system that thrives on fear. Yet the Russian authorities maintain that these prisons are necessary for the country's toughest criminals, framing the brutal conditions as a deterrent and a form of justice. As the camera lingers on the endless fences and frozen landscapes, one question grows louder. Who can truly survive such a place? It is a challenge, not just to the body, but to the soul, a test of endurance where every day lived is an act of quiet defiance. The journey into Russia's most brutal prisons is not just an exploration of a penal system, but a confrontation with what humans can endure when stripped of freedom, comfort, and dignity. Inside these walls, daily life is a relentless test of endurance. The cells are cramped and dim, often built for 4 but holding twice as many men. Rusted bunks line the walls with barely enough space to turn, and a single barred window lets in only a pale trace of daylight. In the bitter Russian winter, frost creeps across the inside of the walls, and inmates sleep in layers of clothes to fight the cold. Food offers little comfort. Watery soup, black bread, and thin porridge served at rigid times. Every meal is consumed quickly, partly from hunger and partly because lingering too long in the mess hall invites unwanted attention. There is an unspoken hierarchy among prisoners that newcomers must navigate immediately. Veteran inmates, often called thieves-in-law, control the social order. They decide who works where, who gets a better spot to sleep, and who is left with the worst chores. A wrong word or a glance held too long can spark violence. Disputes are settled not with guards but with fists, improvised weapons, or brutal intimidation. Trust is rare, alliances are fragile, and every relationship carries risk. Guards move through the corridors like silent shadows, their boots striking the concrete in a rhythm that keeps everyone on edge. Officially, they enforce rules, but many inmates say the guards are another danger altogether. Beatings are reported quietly, whispered in the few moments when prisoners can speak without being overheard. Corruption is common. A bribe might buy a warm jacket or a safer work assignment, but asking for it outright could backfire. The threat of punishment, solitary confinement in a pitch-black cell, denial of food, or sudden transfer to a harsher colony, hangs over every interaction. Beyond the cells, work assignments dominate the day. In some prisons, men spend hours sewing uniforms or assembling simple products under watchful eyes. The work is tedious but compulsory, and refusal can mean loss of rations or worse. Breaks are short and closely monitored. For many, the physical strain is less punishing than the mental weight of repetition, each day blending into the next until time itself feels meaningless. The psychological pressure is constant. Letters from home are heavily censored and often delayed for weeks. Visits from family, if allowed, require long journeys across Russia's vast expanse, leaving many prisoners effectively cut off from the outside world. Isolation feeds anxiety and despair. Some inmates create small rituals to keep their minds intact, scratching hidden calendars on the wall, whispering prayers, or replaying memories of freedom until sleep takes over. In this environment, survival is not just about enduring hunger or cold. It is about protecting the fragments of humanity that remain. Every action, when to speak, where to stand, how to look at another man, can mean the difference between a beating and a quiet night. Each day is a delicate balance between invisibility and the small acts of resistance that keep a person alive. The guards enforce authority with an almost mechanical precision, yet their power extends far beyond the official rulebook. Every clang of a door or sudden command reminds inmates that any misstep can trigger punishment. Routine inspections often turn violent, with prisoners forced to stand in freezing corridors for hours while cells are searched for contraband. Accounts from former inmates describe how even minor infractions, like a missing button or an untidy bunk, can lead to beatings or confinement in a dark, windowless punishment cell where the cold gnaws at every bone. The line between discipline and abuse blurs until it disappears entirely. Corruption seeps through the system like an unspoken currency. Guards and administrators who accept bribes can smuggle in cigarettes, food, or even small tools, but the price is steep and the risk higher still. One miscalculation can mean losing privileges or being transferred to a harsher special regime prison, a place where the days are longer, the work is harder, and surveillance never relents. For those with no money or outside connections, survival becomes even more precarious. They must rely on cunning, alliances with powerful inmates, or sheer luck to avoid the worst assignments and constant harassment. Forced labor remains a core part of life inside these colonies. Prisoners sew uniforms, craft furniture, or toil in small factories, their output feeding the state economy. The work is monotonous, repetitive, and unending. Breaks are rare and timed to the minute, while guards watch from high towers or patrol the floors. Refusing to work can mean starvation rations or solitary confinement, so most obey without complaint, though the exhaustion shows in hollow eyes and worn faces. Punishments for resistance can be brutal. Solitary confinement cells are barely large enough to stretch out in, with no heat and little light. Prisoners describe spending days or weeks in these concrete boxes, fed through a small slot, unable to tell night from day. The psychological impact is profound. Some emerge silent and withdrawn, others broken with rage. Yet these cells are a constant threat, used to maintain control and remind everyone that defiance carries a price. Despite the harshness, small rebellions persist. Hidden notes passed between cells, whispered conversations during work detail, or a smuggled radio broadcast become acts of quiet defiance. But the system is designed to crush even these flickers of resistance. Surveillance cameras capture every movement, and informants among the inmates report anything suspicious, ensuring that trust is a rare and dangerous luxury. Within these walls, The official narrative is one of order and reform, but the lived reality is fear and endurance. The authority of the guards is absolute, reinforced not only by rules, but by the ever-present possibility of violence. For prisoners, each day is a negotiation between obedience and survival, a constant calculation of how much dignity can be preserved without provoking the power that governs every corner of their existence. Survival in this environment demands more than strength. It requires strategy and an unshakable will. Prisoners who endure year after year learn to read the room with near psychic precision, gauging moods and sensing danger before it erupts. Alliances form quietly, not out of friendship, but necessity. A shared cigarette, a whispered warning, or a secret trade of food can mean the difference between life and a brutal beating. Those who manage to stay neutral, neither challenging the hierarchy nor appearing weak, often fare best, blending into the background like shadows on concrete. Mental resilience is as critical as any physical defense. Some inmates build invisible walls in their minds, reciting poems, replaying memories, or setting small daily goals just to keep a grip on time. Others turn to faith, carving tiny crosses into wooden bunks, or silently praying through the long nights. Creativity becomes a lifeline. Rough sketches etched into walls, homemade chess pieces carved from bread, and secret songs hummed under the breath remind them they are more than a number. Resourcefulness is a constant companion. Simple objects take on new purpose, bread molded into tools, scraps of cloth turned into makeshift bandages, a smuggled radio wire serving as both connection and hope. Bartering thrives in this underground economy, where tea leaves, extra bread, or a spare pair of socks can buy favors or protection. Yet every trade carries risk. One wrong deal or misplaced word can spark violence or attract the guards' scrutiny. Health challenges only add to the struggle. Malnutrition weakens bodies, while untreated infections spread quickly in overcrowded cells. Prison doctors often lack supplies, and serious illnesses can become death sentences. Some prisoners devise their own remedies, using herbs smuggled in by visitors or brewing crude antiseptics from whatever they can find. Survival often hinges on the ability to stay unnoticed while quietly tending to injuries and sickness. Stories of endurance travel like legends through the prison corridors. Tales of inmates who survived decades by keeping their minds sharp and their tempers cool. These whispered accounts provide a fragile sense of possibility. If someone else endured, perhaps you can too. Still, the price of survival is high. Many leave physically alive but emotionally hollow, their sense of trust and self eroded by years of constant vigilance. In the end, survival is not about winning, but about holding on to a flicker of humanity amid relentless hardship. Each small act of defiance, a hidden drawing, a quiet prayer, a secret friendship, is a declaration that the prison has not claimed the last piece of the soul. In these moments of silent resistance, prisoners carve out a sliver of dignity, proving that even in Russia's harshest prisons, the human spirit can refuse to break. Beyond the towering walls and frozen barbed wire, the world is beginning to take notice of what happens inside these hidden colonies. International human rights groups and investigative journalists have gathered testimonies from former inmates, exposing beatings, forced labor, and medical neglect. Reports from organizations such as Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch describe a system where basic dignity is routinely denied and where accountability is rare. Satellite images of remote prison camps and leaked photographs have amplified global outrage, sparking calls for reform from the United Nations and European human rights councils. Russian officials, however, continue to defend the system as both necessary and misunderstood. They argue that harsh measures keep the country's most dangerous offenders under control and claim that conditions have improved since the Soviet era. State media often portray the prisons as orderly and rehabilitative, dismissing outside criticism as politically motivated. For many prisoners and their families, these official statements feel like a cruel distortion of the reality they endure. Efforts to create change face enormous obstacles. Lawyers who challenge prison abuse risk harassment or arrest, and independent journalists struggle to gain access or protect their sources. Small reforms occasionally appear, such as limited increases in medical supplies or slight improvements in visitation rights. But they rarely last. In a country where vast distances isolate the camps and government oversight is minimal, systemic change remains an uphill battle. Meanwhile, the human cost is impossible to ignore. Former inmates speak of returning to society with deep psychological scars, anxiety, insomnia, and an ingrained mistrust of others. Families who waited years for a loved one's release often find them transformed, quiet, and withdrawn, as though a piece of them never left the cell. These stories fuel international pressure, yet inside the prisons, day-to-day life remains as unforgiving as ever. The question lingers like an echo across the icy tundra. Can anyone truly survive these prisons and remain whole? Survival here is not just measured in heartbeats or years served, but in how much of one's spirit can endure unbroken. For those who emerge, freedom is not an ending, but a beginning. A slow, painful attempt to reclaim the parts of themselves left behind in the endless gray corridors of Russia's most brutal prison system.